Jack had been riding across the vast desert for hours, his horse's hooves echoing in the quiet, empty landscape. The sun was starting to dip behind the hills, casting long shadows over the dry earth. He wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary. Just another day, just another ride. But as he passed a cluster of rocks, something caught his eye. A small movement at the base of a boulder. He pulled the reins of his horse and slowed down, squinting into the gathering dusk. At first he thought it might be an animal, a fox or a coyote perhaps, but as he drew closer his heart tightened. It was a child, a little girl no older than 8, her small body curled up in a pitiful attempt to shield herself from the elements. Her skin was dirty and her clothes were tattered. She was so thin it was almost hard to believe she was alive. Jack immediately dismounted, his boots kicking up a small cloud of dust as he stepped toward her. The girl didn't move, her face pale, eyes closed, as if she had no strength left to defend herself. He crouched beside her, reaching out with a steady hand, his voice soft and comforting. "Hey there, little one," Jack said, his voice gentle. "Are you okay?" The girl's eyes fluttered open and Jack could see the fear in her gaze. She wasn't sure if he was a friend or a threat. But when she saw the kindness in his face, her guard started to lower. Slowly, she blinked up at him, her dry lips parting in a small gasp. Jack felt his stomach turn at the sight of her condition. Her lips were cracked and her face was sunken. She was starving, and he knew she had been out here for far too long. There was no telling how long she had been wandering alone in the desert. Without hesitation, Jack took off his jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders, offering what little comfort he could. "Come on, let's get you some food and water," he said, his voice steady despite the urgency of the situation. With a careful hand, Jack lifted her onto his horse. The girl didn't resist, her tiny arms wrapping around his waist as he mounted and urged the horse into a slow trot. The sun was setting fast, and Jack knew he didn't have much time before it became too dark to see. So he kept his focus on getting them both back to his cabin. The journey felt longer than it should have, and Jack could feel the weight of the girl's fragile body leaning against him. He tried to comfort her, speaking softly as the horse moved steadily over the rocky terrain. "You're safe now, little one," he repeated, though he wasn't sure if she understood him. Still, her grip on him tightened and she let out a small, relieved sigh. By the time they reached his cabin, the sun had disappeared behind the horizon, and the desert night had begun to settle in. Jack carefully dismounted, holding the girl in his arms. She was so light, her bones almost too delicate to touch. He carried her inside and gently laid her on the bed next to the warm fire. He quickly grabbed some water and a piece of dried jerky, then brought them to her. Her eyes fluttered again as she stared at the food, but she didn't make a move to take it. "You're going to be okay," Jack said, his voice soft but firm. "Here, drink this. It'll help you feel better." It took a few moments, but finally she reached out, her fingers trembling as she grasped the water. She drank it in small sips, as though her body had forgotten how to take in nourishment. Jack watched her closely, his heart aching as he wondered what had happened to her, where she had come from, and why she was out there alone in the desert. But for now he couldn't ask those questions. She needed rest, food, and safety more than anything else. The next few days passed in a blur of quiet care. Jack kept the fire burning and did his best to offer the girl anything he could. His cabin wasn't much, just a small one-room shack with a wood stove and some old furniture. But it was warm, and it was a shelter from the harsh desert winds. The girl, who had yet to speak, seemed to find some comfort in the routine. Jack fed her whenever she would eat, and he kept her hydrated, making sure she stayed warm by the fire. As the days went by, she started to regain a bit of strength. Her eyes were brighter now, no longer clouded with fear or hunger. She was still quiet, but Jack could see her watching him more closely, as if she were trying to understand who he was. It was clear that she was scared, and Jack knew it was because of what had happened to her before she came to him, but he could also see that she trusted him, at least a little. Trust wasn't easy to come by when your world had been torn apart. By the 4th day, the girl finally spoke. Her voice was soft, barely a whisper, but Jack caught every word. Where am I?" she asked, her eyes wide and uncertain. I don't remember." Jack smiled warmly, sitting beside her. "You're safe now. You're at my place. You've been out in the desert for a long time, but you're okay now." The girl blinked slowly, as if trying to process his words. She looked around the cabin and then back at Jack. "Who are you?" she asked quietly. "My name's Jack," he replied, his voice gentle. "I'm a cowboy. I found you out there in the desert." The girl didn't respond right away. She looked at her hands, then back at Jack. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know how to thank you." Jack shook his head. "You don't need to. You're safe, and that's all that matters." For a few moments, the room was silent. The fire crackled in the hearth, and Jack found himself just staring at the girl, wondering what had happened to her. But before he could ask, the silence was broken by a distant sound, horses' hooves pounding steadily across the land. Jack stood up quickly, his hand instinctively reaching for his rifle by the door. He hadn't heard a sound like this before, and something about it made his gut twist. He stepped outside and squinted into the growing darkness. In the distance, he could just make out the shapes of several riders approaching. The air seemed to hold its breath as Jack stood there, watching. His mind raced, but there was no time for fear. Whoever was out there was coming, and there was no turning back now. Jack stepped outside into the cool evening air, his boots crunching on the dry ground. The sounds of the approaching riders grew louder, and his pulse quickened. He knew this moment was coming, but it didn't make it any easier. As the figures in the distance grew closer, Jack's grip tightened on his rifle. He could tell that there were at least 3 riders, and they weren't moving with the casual pace of travelers. These were purposeful riders, and they were heading straight for his cabin. The firelight from inside flickered across the open space, casting long shadows on the ground as the riders drew closer. Jack's mind raced. He could already guess who they might be. Apache warriors? A group of raiders? He couldn't be sure. But the one thing Jack knew for certain was that his life was about to change. As the first rider came into view, Jack's heart sank. The woman in the lead was unmistakable. She wore a traditional Apache dress, her face painted with the symbols of her people. Her hair was braided tightly and her posture was proud. But there was something else about her, something that made Jack's breath catch in his chest. She had the look of authority. She was the chief's daughter. Behind her were 2 other women, equally strong and proud, each dressed in the same manner. Their faces, however, were more guarded, and their eyes watched the cabin with a calculating gaze. The 3 women slowed their horses as they reached the edge of the clearing, their eyes trained on Jack, who stood frozen just outside his cabin. The wind rustled through the trees as they came to a halt, the sound adding to the tension that seemed to hang thick in the air. The chief's daughter was the first to speak, her voice steady but firm. "We know you have our child," she said, her eyes locked onto Jack with an intensity that made him uneasy. Jack swallowed hard, his throat dry. He had hoped that maybe they wouldn't come for Ayanna, but deep down he knew he was wrong. He had no right to keep her. She was not his daughter. He was just the one who had found her. The moment he'd decided to help her, Jack had known there might be consequences. He took a deep breath, steadying himself before he spoke. "I didn't want to take her. She was alone, lost in the desert. She was starving. I couldn't leave her out there." The chief's daughter didn't seem to soften at his words. "You did what any decent person would do," she said, though there was no trace of warmth in her voice. "But that doesn't change what's at stake here. She is one of ours, and we will take her back." The words hit Jack like a stone. Ayanna had already become more than just a girl to him. He had been caring for her, watching her recover from the trauma she'd endured. In the short time she had been with him, she had become a part of his world. The thought of losing her brought a strange ache to his chest. But he knew better than to argue with the Apache, especially someone as powerful as the chief's daughter. The Apache didn't take kindly to being defied. "I understand," Jack said, his voice low and resigned. "But she's still recovering. I can't just send her with you without making sure she's strong enough." The chief's daughter considered him for a long moment, her eyes never leaving his. The silence between them stretched thin, and Jack could feel the weight of her gaze. It was as if she were reading his every thought, weighing his words carefully before deciding whether to trust him. After what felt like an eternity, she spoke again. "Take care of her, then. But know this, she belongs with us. If you try to keep her, we will come for her, and we will not be kind." Jack's heart dropped at the finality in her words. There was no negotiation here. The Apache had spoken. The chief's daughter turned her horse toward the cabin, signaling for the others to follow. Jack watched them ride toward the door, his thoughts spinning. Inside, Ayanna sat on the bed, staring at the floor. She had heard the voices outside and had watched Jack leave. But now, with the women drawing closer, she could feel the anxiety building inside her. She didn't know what was happening, but she could tell that something was wrong. Jack had been kind to her, had given her food, shelter, and safety. She didn't want to leave him, not after everything he had done for her. Jack entered the cabin slowly, his mind heavy with the conversation he'd just had. Ayanna looked up at him, her small face filled with worry. She knew something was happening, but she didn't know what. "Ayanna," Jack began, his voice soft. "The Apache women, they've come for you." Her eyes widened and she stood up, looking toward the door. They want me to go back?" Jack nodded, his gaze filled with regret. "Yes, they do. I know it's hard, but you belong with them. They are your people." Ayanna stood still for a moment, her small hands clenched at her sides. She had felt a connection to Jack, like he was the only one who had cared for her when no one else had. She had come to trust him, and now, in this moment, the thought of leaving him behind was terrifying. But she also knew that the Apache were her people. She couldn't deny it, no matter how much she wished things were different. "I don't want to go," she said quietly, her voice trembling. I don't want to leave you." Jack felt his chest tighten at her words. He had grown attached to the girl in a way he hadn't expected. He couldn't deny it. He had come to care for her deeply. But he also knew that she had to go back to her people. It was the right thing to do. "I know," he said softly, kneeling down to her level. "But you have to. They're your family. You'll be with people who understand you, who will keep you safe, and they'll take care of you better than I ever could." Ayanna looked up at him, tears welling in her eyes. "Will I ever see you again?" Jack's heart ached as he placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I don't know, little one, but I'll always remember you." With that, Ayanna nodded, her face a mixture of sadness and acceptance. Jack turned to face the door as the Apache women entered the cabin, their eyes scanning the room before landing on him. The chief's daughter gave him a brief nod, acknowledging the effort he had made. Ayanna hesitated for a moment, her small feet shuffling toward the door. But as she walked past Jack, she paused, looking up at him one last time. "Thank you," she whispered before stepping out into the night where her people were waiting for her. Jack watched her leave, feeling the weight of the moment press down on him. He knew this was the right thing to do, but it didn't make it any easier. As he stood in the doorway, he heard the sounds of the riders moving away, Ayanna's soft footsteps blending into the wind. He could never forget the girl who had come into his life when he had least expected it, changing everything with her presence. She was gone now, but Jack knew that the memory of her would stay with him forever.